Hold on to your butt.
Welcome to episode 48 of the Civil War Breakfast Club. I'm your co-host Mary, and tonight I'm joined by the guy who predicted Pete Alonso would win the home run derby, and also the most awesome Civil War nerd I know, Darren Weeks.
Wow, Pete Alonso talked. I think we hear about St. Peter of Bourne today, Mary, but here we are.
I just want you to know I pay attention.
You do. Pete Alonso, the New York Mets, University of Florida, played for my beloved Bourne Braves, and he won the home run derby for the second consecutive time. So good for him and good for everybody else. So how are you here on this rainy Tuesday night in both of our locales?
Yes, I'm good. I'm waiting for a gigantic thunderstorm to possibly roll in, so hopefully we can get the podcast recorded before it does.
Well, if it starts to rain really, really bad, just remember, if this rain keeps up, it won't come down. Remember that.
Fucker.
I guess we can get started here, get rolling, get a little fun.
Well, how are you? I didn't ask you how you are.
Thanks for asking. As a matter of fact, I'm doing fine. I'm doing okay. Things that life is good. Life is good. We're going to take it back east today. We're going to move it back out to the East Coast, and we're going to talk more about some of this stuff. But I know as usual, we have some business to do, as always.
We do. Well, the first thing is that we are wearing our merch tonight, our T-shirts as well.
That's right. All right, Civil War Breakfast Club T-shirts, courtesy of Zazzle, where you can get all of your Civil War Breakfast Club needs, Mary, except, of course, the stickers. We should go to TR Historical, which someone forgot to tweet when she made the tweet this afternoon, and I had to correct. But hey, I'm just happy to be part of the team.
Thank you for having my back.
I do my best.
Fucker.
I do my best. Getting sick of carrying you, but that's okay. We'll get through it. We'll get through it as always.
Anyway, what are you drinking tonight, and out of what mug?
I am drinking a local beer called Provincetown Double Rainbow Beer, which is really, really good. It's a double IPA from up the coast here from where I live. And I am drinking it out of my North Civil War Champions coffee mug because even though this battle did not ultimately lead to a Union victory, it ultimately won the war, even though it lost the battle. So I felt it was appropriate to have this mug going today. What about you?
I am drinking Haze Mama New England IPA from Great Lakes Brewery, based out of Toronto. And I'm drinking it out of my Ride with the Winner mug, which John LaRoe of LaRoe Designs is very nice. And he sent us each one of these. So you can buy those on Redbubble. They're really, really cool mugs with a really cool flag design on them. And like you, I picked that one because even though Wallace really isn't the winner here, he kind of is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to tell you, you redeemed yourself for this intro after the last one. Speaking of redemption stories, we got one sort of talk about tonight.
We do.
A redemption story. When we talk about Lew Wallace, when we talk about the Battle of Monocacy back in 1864 towards the end. So interesting battle. And like we said before, it's one of the most, if not the most underrated battles in the entire Civil War, in my opinion, with huge ramifications ultimately.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot like a Ball's Bluff in that way that you don't think of, Ball's Bluff. Nobody ever thinks to look at that one. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the ramifications, especially the political ones, and it's like, holy shit. Monocacy in studying it is a lot like that.
Well, they were ultimately a army who put themselves in front. I don't want to say sacrifice themselves, but put themselves as a speed bump in the way to slow down this onslaught by Jubal Early, who was hell-bent on taking Washington. And it was a small army that held out for 9 hours. And because of that, this battle is called the Battle That Saved Washington. And it's not hyperbole when you look at the details of this. And a lot of people don't really study into this one as much. A lot of people certainly don't visit it. I was there a month or two ago, and I was with my friend Bill. We were the only ones there the entire time we were there. So people don't visit it, but it's certainly one that needs to be studied. And what a great idea that we do it tonight. What do you think?
Yeah, we're right around the anniversary of it in Fort Stevens. But I think before we get into the battle, we kind of have to set the stage for what's going on in the summer of 1864. In the Civil War. So the big thing that's looming is the 1864 election. And that is on not just Abraham Lincoln's mind, it's on the mind of General Grant. It's on the mind of General Sherman, who is in the Western Theater, currently on his Atlanta campaign and chasing down Joseph E. Johnston, who I think in just a few days' time, it will be the anniversary of when John Bell Hood replaces him. I think I'm getting that right. As well, obviously Robert E. Lee, it's on his mind too. And that is going to play into what he is going to ask Jubal Early to do here. Now, just quickly, General Grant he's in the East now, General Meade, and with the Army of the Potomac, and he is into his overland campaign.
Yeah, so set the stage militarily. So Grant is dug in around Petersburg. Lee is dug in the same area, and they're kind of staring at each other. That's what they do, apparently. Lincoln's sitting in Washington, D.C., and he is freaking out, borderline fetal position about this 1864 election. Now, good news for Lincoln is Sherman's doing his thing in Atlanta. He's doing okay, and Grant has got entrenched, but he's kind of hit that standoff with him. So Jefferson Davis, he's sitting there in Richmond as well, trying to figure out what the hell is going to go on here. The clock is running towards the 64 election, so time is on his side, sort of. Now, he's got problems himself, okay? And that issue is that Shenandoah Valley.
Yep.
The Shenandoah Valley is the area of Virginia where is the breadbasket. That's where most of the food comes from. And by this point, both Grant and Sherman, for that matter, are cutting off supply lines to try to bleed out, starve, and to the Confederacy. So Davis knows he has to keep the Shenandoah Valley free of feds because he has to keep that food source open, or that's it. We talked a lot about the supplies at the last episode, the retreat from Gettysburg. This is even bigger because it's the whole valley right there in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Now, John C. Breckinridge, we talked about him before, he's holding it under rebel control. Henry Halleck, going back to Washington, D.C. real quick, he has been bumped down, Mary, to Lincoln's chief of staff because U.S. Grant has been promoted to general-in-chief of the Army. And Halleck is telling Lincoln, listen, this stalemate in Petersburg, I mean, we're getting reports of this bloodshed going on. And all these guys getting killed it ain't going to help the election polls. So we got to get this thing done. How about we send some troops from D.C. down to Petersburg because they're sitting around doing nothing. They're doing some whittling, playing a little bit of Twister. Who knows what
going
they're
to the
doing.
DQ.
But they're going to the DQ. But the reality is they're sitting around and they're idle, and we could really use them down in Petersburg. Now, Abraham Lincoln, as we know, has been scared to death of having Washington, D.C. exposed. The one consistent thing about Lincoln is that he always told his generals to make sure Washington is protected.
Yeah.
But he understands the situation. He says, well, Lee is buried in Petersburg. He ain't going anywhere. There's no one going to challenge Washington. We can probably send troops down to Petersburg if it's going to expedite that situation. We have some local home guard who'll take care of it, and I think we're good. Grant, like I said, he's digging in, and he's just begging Lee to attack him. But Lee, of course, won't do it because he's smart about it. He knows. So it begins that siege that goes on and on and on. Like I said before, Lee is hearing from Davis, whatever the hell you do, you got to keep that valley clear. You have to do it. Yep. Especially because we're approaching that harvest time now. Now is the time. If there was ever a time to do it, now is the time. So Lee is going to send out fun lover Jubal Early to go up to the valley and push out Union Generals David Hunter and Franz Sigel out of that area, because defending Richmond makes no sense if you're going to starve to death. So what the hell is the friggin' point?
Yeah.
So he tells Early, go up there, clear the valley, go threaten Maryland, make a feint towards Washington.
Yeah.
Because if you do, it's going to have some benefits. Now, he knows a pain in the ass like Jubal Early is the perfect guy to do it. He just is.
Exactly. I mean, the interesting thing about Early is he was opposed to secession. And then Virginia seceded, and he was like, fuck that, Well,
we'll talk about him. He was, from a blue blood family in Virginia. We'll talk about old Jubal here in a little bit. Lee knows that this 1864 election is looming. Like to your point, they all know it. So Early's raid could push the North into absolute panic. If he gets up there, if he's up there running around and he's near Washington or Baltimore around election time, it can cause all kinds of problems. It could, in essence, win this war for the Confederacy if Lincoln loses. So you want to get a good fear in them. Now, Jubal, he is not liking this plan too much. He's like, oh, Jesus, really? He's lukewarm at the beginning, but he ultimately does agree to do it. And Lee pressures him. Listen, here's the deal, Jubal. It's important. He goes, you cannot screw this up. You have to succeed on this plan. You got to go up there. You got to clear the valley, and you have to try to put a spook into old Lincoln, because that's what we have to do. Mm-hmm. If you do, it's going to also pull some troops away from Richmond. I mean, from Petersburg, which is what we need. Now, Jubal Early, I'll talk about him real quick. Lee's bad old man, one of the better nicknames in the Civil War. He got that nickname because he was short, had a bad temper, he was profane, so he was partially Canadian. and he allegedly is the only person that's allowed to swear in front of Bobby Lee. Yes. Now, who knows if that's true, but that's the rumor. So he could F-bomb. So again,
So it's kind of like me on this podcast?
I was going to say, it's like Jubal Mary, same exact thing. He's born, like I said, he's born in Franklin County, Virginia, and he's from a blue blood Virginia family. Attends a snotty little private school in Franklin County. He's the first boy in his county to go to West Point. He gets that appointment thanks to his father, admittedly. Graduates 18th in the class of 50 from 1837 with guys like none other than Joe Hooker and William French and the great Braxton Bragg.
Yep.
John
Pemberton's
Sedgwick,
there.
and Pemberton. Yeah, they're all there. The dream team has a plate broken over his head by Low Armistead, and Armistead gets booted out of school for it. So you could tell all these names that are familiar with Civil War people are all at this point. He's going to finish up. He's going to join the 3rd U.S. Artillery. He's going to go down and fight the Seminoles down in Florida for a little while. He's going to quit the Army in 1838. He's actually going to study law. He passes the bar in 1840. Now, can you imagine? You need to go to court and Jubal Early as your lawyer. Just let that sink in for a second.
He
But
looks
that's
like
what
an
happened.
angry person. I'm sure he's really good. Like, he'd be a good prosecutor.
Did you say Ute? I can only imagine that. He's going to go back in the military. He's going to join that 1st Virginia Volunteers. He's going to go fight in Mexico. He didn't join the Confederacy immediately, to your point. He was kind of neutral. He's like, I don't know. But he loses his shit when Lincoln calls up those volunteers. He calls up those 75,000 volunteers to squelch the rebels in South Carolina after Sumter. And he says, the hell with this, and joins the Confederacy. He's going to join the Virginia militia as a brigadier general. Later, he'll be a colonel of the 24th Virginia. He's going to get his star after that first Bull Run. He's all set now. He's got 15,000 guys. He's going to do it. He's going to take them from Petersburg, and he's going to head them into the valley. Now, he has 2 corps by John Breckinridge, mentioned, and Robert Rhodes. Now, he's going to pick up Breckinridge here in a little bit. He doesn't quite have him just yet, but he's going to get him. And he has cavalry with Robert Ransom, artillery with the guy named Floyd King as well. Jubal's a bitter old man, Mary. Okay. Yeah. He wants to beat David Hunter personally. He doesn't like Hunter because Hunter had that self-emancipation proclamation in 1862. And Early was a big slave guy and he wanted nothing to do with that. It was rescinded. It didn't happen. But Early never forgot that. He wanted to beat him as he clears the valley. June 17th, 1864 is kind of when it all gets started. Now, we're going to real quick talk about the lead up to Monocacy. You're not going to go too much crazy. Yeah. Battle of Lynchburg happens. This is when Early meets up with Breckinridge, I mentioned before. This is when they kind of get together. They chase the feds at Hunter from the valley. They send him to West Virginia. For the delight of the locals, because Hunter was a bastard. And after he's gone, it really clears Early's plan to get into Maryland now because he's got no one in front of him. Yep. So his primary goal, right off the bat, to clear the valley is kind of already done. That's kind of done. Phase 2 now is to march on Washington and scare Lincoln. So now he's got Breckinridge. Yeah. His army is up to about 18,000 people, give or take. Now this army is called the Army of the Valley. So, so that's what they're called. And they're going to continue to move on as they head towards Martinsburg, Virginia, which is now West Virginia. They're going to push those Federals out. So wherever they go now, the Feds are going to be vacating the dance floor, to your point, right? Yeah. Early felt he really did at this point like the entire future of his country was in his hands. He's having success, and he's Jubal Early, and his head's swelling a little bit. And he's getting this George Washington syndrome where he thinks, okay, this whole thing is in my hand. They're going to enter Maryland for the 3rd time. And so perhaps 3rd time will be the charm for old Jubal Early.
Yeah. But just before that, he goes to fuck with Franz Sigel at Harper's Ferry. And when he's there, Sigel, he and Sigel end up just basically staring at each other the entire time. Early's troops are going to totally ransack Harper's Ferry and fuck with the Union supplies and all that. And then just when I think Sigel's thinking, my God, how much is he going to like attack me and fuck me up here? Early turns and goes just like that.
The Feds are burning the bridge at Harper's Ferry too.
Yeah.
They fired that up pretty good. So now Early is in Maryland and they're hooting and hollering with that rebel yell and causing all kinds of pain in the ass. Enter the Baltimore, Ohio Railroad in Baltimore. Okay. This is the oldest railroad in the country, by the way, Mary. And the president was a guy named John Garrett. Now, Garrett is one of these dudes in Washington, D.C. who's respected by everybody. He's in all the social circles. Everyone knows who John Garrett is. Well, he's going to report from his employees that the Rebs are in a large mass, more than 10,000 people, and they are tearing up his railroad. They're cutting down the telegraph lines west of Baltimore, causing all kinds of problems, okay? Garrett, of course, is stunned by this because they don't expect anybody to be up in that area. He sends a telegram to Washington telling them of this large rebel force. Now, Lincoln, must have had that pucker effect right off the bat when he hears this one, because he's already scared to death of Washington, D.C.
Yep.
falling. He's also knows he doesn't have anybody protecting Washington. Because don't forget, he had agreed to send those troops down.
Exactly.
So he has not much guarding Washington, D.C. He's it ain't much. So Lincoln quickly realizes that he has a political and a military problem on his hands right in his friggin' backyard, just months before the election. So this is the nightmare for Lincoln right off the bat.
Exactly. But Halleck and Grant don't believe it's a threat. Well, like Grant is saying, no. Early's still here at Petersburg and Richmond area.
They don't. So when Grant gets that telegram, he looks at him and goes, "No, this is ridiculous." So Grant, Halleck, there's no way this report is true. They're convinced Early is still in Petersburg. There's no way he's through the valley, which surprised me because Hunter fought him. You'd think Hunter would, say something. Oh, by the way, got my ass kicked by Jubal Early today.
Sigel sends a message to say they're here. They're coming. And again, it's completely like Grant's like, no, it's okay. Early's still here.
Well, what's funny is Grant says, well, if it's anybody, it's Ewell. And I'm not going to worry about it. Yeah. He doesn't think it's Early. He thinks it's Richard Ewell, if it's even true. But then what he does is he has some prisoners in Petersburg, and he gathers them together, and they say, "Oh yeah, it's Jubal Early's up there. It's just so you know, it's Early." So now he realizes it's Early, and so he knows it's a tough situation. So July 4th, 1864, Early's, like to your point, they're sitting at Harper's Ferry having a great old time, having a big bash, emptying pitchers maybe at the old Rabbit Hole Gastropub, which I've been many times. That's probably where they are. And from South Mountain, those signal post guys, those wigwag dudes, are starting to see the rebel columns now. Okay. So that area falls under a jurisdiction of a place called the Middle Department, which covers that Delaware, Baltimore, Frederick, that whole area. Not the most creative name. I mean, the guy who designed the Japanese flag was more creative than the guy who made this name, admittedly, but that area of the Middle Department is under control by a guy named General Lew Wallace.
Yes.
We've talked about before.
Misfit now, Wallace, from Shiloh.
Misfit from Shiloh. He's from Indiana, okay? He's a son of David Wallace, not the guy from The Office, so don't ask. Different David Wallace. He's not a West Pointer, which is going to be an issue for him going forward with a lot of these politicians. But he's a staunch Unionist. He's a big-time patriot. The fact that he wasn't a West Pointer made him hated, specifically by guys like Halleck, just didn't like him.
Grant's not a big fan of his either.
Well, you mentioned that because of Shiloh. So Shiloh, we mentioned before, we talked about this before.
Yeah.
Lew Wallace had a great time at Fort Donelson, did really, really well. But Grant blames Wallace, quotation fingers, scapegoat for Shiloh because he had that slow arrival on that first day. Now, after Shiloh, he gets put in the corner, to your point, for a while. He doesn't really get to do anything. He gets blamed for Shiloh for a couple of different reasons, which makes absolutely no sense. Was he got his orders from Grant to come down, but Grant sends his quartermaster to find him and give him the orders instead of a messenger.
Yeah.
So now they're running out of bullets, ammo, because the quartermaster's gone, and he's got to walk. He has to march 6 miles an hour in the mud to get there. That's what Wallace had to do with Shiloh, right? He doesn't get there in time. He's supposed to be there in the morning, gets there later in the day. They get their asses kicked on the first day. He needs someone to blame. He's going to blame Wallace. And Grant, as we know, he's going to blame you for a long time with this stuff, and he's going to hold that grudge.
When you get put in Grant's doghouse, unless, and this, I'm sorry I have to say it, unless your name is William Tecumseh Sherman, because he was caught off guard at Shiloh, unless your name is William Tecumseh Sherman, you're not coming out of that doghouse for a little while. And I love Grant, but there is that about him.
So Wallace basically gets put in the corner, and he has no command really of guys on the field. This is a guy who's proud. He's a patriot. He's a Unionist. He wants to fight. He wants to fix his reputation because his reputation is completely shit canned.
And he knows he's so bitter after what's happened to him. Like he writes his wife just before Monocacy, "Soon will be heard the sound of the trumpet and the shout, and I will not be there." And that's Wallace writing to his wife, and he's very bitter. And he's all of 34 years old at the time of Monocacy.
So April 6th, 1864, which is ironically the 2-year anniversary of when he screwed up at Shiloh, he's going to get another shot. He's going to get a shot at this Middle Department. It's part of the 8th Corps is what it is. We talked about Robert Milroy a couple weeks ago, who was also part of this Middle Department, similar group. His focus is Baltimore. His job primarily at this point, because Baltimore's under martial law, to just be there, don't let the town riot. We want to keep the peace heading into the election. That's kind of what his job
Mm-hmm.
is. And he's like, okay, I guess that's what I'm going to have to do. But Wallace wants to fight. He wants to redeem himself. He wants combat. His troops are not exactly the Iron Brigade here. His troops are green men. They call them 100-day men. These are guys who are signed on for short duration, 100 days, to do things like guard bridges, guard railroads.
Yeah.
They're not exactly fighting men. And he's got about 2,800 guys. But these guys have never seen combat. If there's ever a time they have to fight combat, it's going to be interesting because they never have. So
Mm-hmm.
now Wallace, he hears this news about Early in Maryland at this point.
Well, he gets it
So he
firsthand from John Garrett because John
right,
Garrett comes right to
right.
see him.
hmm So he knows there's a real threat, and whether he really thought it or he has hoped it was so he could fight, who knows? But he knows he goes Early's on the move, and he's heading right towards me. He decides he's going to be the guy. So he's going to move his inexperienced army, those 2,800 100-day men,
Yep.
to Frederick, Maryland, and they're going to go there. He wants to put up a fight. He knows Early's got a big army because he's hearing more than 10,000 guys, and he knows he can't win. He knows. But what he wants to do, I mean, he's not stupid. I mean, he's just the numbers,
Mm-hmm.
Even though he knows he's going to get his butt kicked, he wants to delay Early long enough for two reasons. One, to see where Early's going, because they don't know at this point if it's Washington, D.C. or it's Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And he also, more importantly, says, well, if it's Washington, this will buy time for the government to bring troops back up to protect the city. So that's kind of what it is in a
Yep.
nutshell of how it's going to be. So he knows he's under no illusions he's going to win, but he wants to fight with inexperienced guys. And he's basically throwing himself into the mouth of the lion.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked a lot about these, guys like Howard and these other guys who want to redeem themselves after these perceived mistakes they made. And you can see Wallace's thinking,
Oh,
right?
definitely. That, and he's like, a hardcore unionist. And Garrett has told him that make sure the rebels do not capture that railroad, especially the Monocacy Bridge. Like he emphasizes Monocacy Bridge to him. And before he leaves to go to Monocacy, Wallace tells Garrett, "You may take with you my promise. The bridge shall not be disturbed without a fight." So here he's like, "Yep, I'm going to do this." But yes, there is a definite need to probably, a little bit personal here. Just show Grant hey, look at me, fuck you for what you've done to me with the whole Shiloh thing, but as well as the redemption that, as you mentioned, you see Oliver Otis Howard do, Joseph Hooker does it as well. And now it's Wallace's time to do it.
Well, and this is where Wallace gets a little bit lucky here, okay? So
Yeah.
he's going to be riding his division out towards Frederick. He's going to run into the 6th Corps 3rd Division, a guy named James Ricketts from New York City.
Yeah.
Right? Ricketts is riding his division towards Harper's Ferry, and they're just looking to pick a fight. They're just looking for a fight at this point. Wallace is going to ask him, hey, I could sit there probably behind the little light post, the cigarette in his mouth. Hey, you want to fight? I know I can get you a fight. So he says, why don't you come join me? Because we got Jubal Early coming on the road. You want to come fight with him? And of course, Ricketts is like, oh, okay. So Agree joins. Ricketts has 3,000. He's got experienced guys. Now, these are 6 Corps guys. These are battle-tested dudes that are going to offset that 100-day men, right? So he joins. Now, Wallace has got more than 6,000 guys. Now, he's still outnumbered more than 2 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
But he's got more now. He's got to feel pretty good. Now, old Jubal, he's more making his way through Maryland, and he's causing damage, and he's ransoming towns. Everything he's doing gets into Frederick, Maryland. This is where Wallace decides he's going to basically set up his defense. So he's like, well, so you're guarding those bridges. He's going to guard the Monocacy River, which is about 5 miles from Frederick. Now, what's interesting is while the Confederates are slowly moving into this area, because they're hearing rumors of federal troops. They don't know what the hell they are, but they're hearing stuff. Jubal is back in town trying to bag $200,000 off the locals, right? Which is like $3 million in today's money.
It is.
And so he's out there and he's and the thing is he eventually gets it, right? In the town, it's funny is that the mayor of the town, I think his name was Cole, I think it is. He's delaying him because he's like, I think there's troops. I'm hoping back and buy some time. But whatever happens, he finally pulls out the checkbook and says, here, go. And the troops end up blowing it in the town.
Oh, yeah. They bring it out to them in wicker baskets. This is just a little bit ahead here. When Early finds out the battle's going on, he leaves town and he leaves it to his staff to get this money. And they bring it out to him in these wicker baskets. And then the guys proceed to be like, hey, let's spend some of this. So they're buying fucking fancy food, champagne, They're getting ice cream at the DQ. And no, that's a
They
true
were.
story. These guys did actually get ice cream while they were in Frederick, but they start just spending this money. Now he's collected tribute at a couple other different towns. No word, though, if this money ever does get back to Robert E. Lee or if, Early is keeping it for himself.
Well, he must have banked because he got money a lot of places. But so July 8th, the day before the battle, Wallace is sitting in a place called the Cromus Farm south of Fredericksburg. This is where Early is starting to realize more that there are troops. Now, he doesn't, like I said, he doesn't know what the hell they are. He thinks they're local militia. There's no way in hell it's Army of the Potomac because they're all back in Petersburg, just like they all thought he was back in Petersburg. Wallace is going to learn of Breckinridge's troops moving down that Georgetown, that Washington Pike towards Monocacy. He's going to see these guys coming. And he knows that Early is targeting Washington at this point. So he's like, okay, right off the bat, he goes, that was one of his deals. Where is he going? Now he knows they're coming down that Georgetown Pike towards Washington. They're coming to Washington.
Yeah.
So he's going to set up his army along the Monocacy River to protect that road and the railroad bridge to the capital. Because if they get in the capital, they're going to cause all kinds of problems, and they're not going to stay there probably long. But it's going to be a big mess. So the sun sets, the sun rises. It is July 9th, 1864, at Monocacy Junction, Cromus Farm again, 8 a.m. Right after breakfast, the Rebs are going to open some artillery on the camp of 151st New York, and this is the beginning of the Battle of Monocacy. So the Union is sitting there having breakfast, and all of a sudden they're getting shelled. Federal artillery under Captain Frederick Alexander is going to respond to it, and that 6th Corps is going to skirmish, is going to start to push forward, these skirmishers, right? Now, the 1st Brigade under a guy named William Truex is going to defend that central bridge we talked about that crosses the Monocacy River where the Baltimore Turnpike is. Now, Early is going to order Rhodes's guys, Robert Rhodes, okay, one of his division guys, or actually one of his corps guys, theoretically, to demonstrate on that covered bridge. Because what they want to do is, now Early's concerned. He goes, I don't know what's in my front, so let's just see who the hell's out there and fight. So by 9 o'clock, they're fighting at a place called the Best Farm. Mm-hmm. Now, it's named after the Best family. It just wasn't the best farm in town. It was a name. Okay, so, I can't explain. But coming from the north, down that Georgetown, that Washington Pike, is going to be Stephen, Dodson, and Ramseur. These are his Virginia and North Carolina guys under Rhodes. And they're going to hit those first line of those skirmishers, okay? They're going to hit the 10th Vermont, and they're going to push them back pretty easily. Now, Early, he wants to see what's going on the other side because he still doesn't know what he's dealing with. Yep. He's going to order his cavalry under a guy named John McCausland to ford the river, find a place to ford south of the Best Farm, and attack that Union left flank and at least see what the hell's going on. Because he knows I can't have a direct attack at the middle because I don't know what I'm dealing with. I just don't. I think they're militia, but I don't know. You'll find out. McCausland does find a ford in a place called McKinney Ford, which is right near a place called the Worthington Farm. Now, the Worthington Farm, still there, actually. You go visit it. It's a place it's a big old house. It's just west of modern-day 270. So which is kind of a shame if you visit it because that's a road runs through it. Yeah. That's how the battlefield is. The highway goes right in the middle of it, which kind of sucks. But by 10 o'clock in the morning, Wallace is sitting in a place called Gambrel's Mill, which is east of the Georgetown Pike, and he's behind the line. He's getting reports on his left flank that there's rebel activity. So he tells Ricketts, now Ricketts is a regular, he's a 6th Corps guy, to go defend his left and hold it as long as he can. Just hold it. Because he learns that those rebel forces are moving on to his left. He's going to find a fence, and he's going to place his army on that fence. And in front of that fence is a cornfield that leads to the Worthington Farm. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about McCausland's men is that once they cross, they actually dismount. One thing to mention here is that, cavalry fights, you typically think of them being on horses because they're cavalry. By this point in the Civil War, they're actually fighting more and more dismounted just because of the way the battle tactics have changed. So where Ricketts' men are with this cornfield and all that, the sight line for the Confederates is really obscured. So what happens is the Confederates don't realize that there are Union troops in front of them until they fire at the rebels from 125 yards away. And the Confederates, once the smoke clears from all that, the Confederates who had not been struck down in that, they start retreating. So Ricketts' men manage to push back McCausland's men. And this is what keeps happening at this battle all over, is just even though Wallace and, Ricketts are outnumbered, they manage to keep pushing them back and pushing them back. and
Well,
just running down.
McCaw's
And the whole time, though, for every hour that passes, that is another hour that Jubal Early cannot be making his way to Washington D.C. And that's what's so important about this battle is like every hour matters here.
well, McCausland is a real deal cavalry guy.
Yep.
He's up there with the Mosbys. I mean, I mean, people don't really study him. They called him Tiger McCausland. Real quick, little background on him. He's a Missouri guy. Went to VMI, became a professor of mathematics, just like you at University of Virginia. In 1859, Mary, he and a guy named Thomas Jackson from VMI, I don't know if you've heard of him, he commanded a bunch of VMI cadets to go basically stand guard at the execution of John Brown in Charlestown, West Virginia. So he's got some experience with that. During the war, he takes command in 1864, that cavalry. He participates in that thing with David Hunter, with Lynchburg, we talked about, obviously. He's going to join Jubal Early's cavalry for this Valley campaign. You know, this campaign is going to go on well after this battle, but this is the dude who's going to burn Chambersburg in late July of 1864. They don't pay him $100,000, so he's like, okay, we're going to torch. He torches the whole town. But it's interesting about him, though, is he actually gets tried for this after the war. And they're going to put him away for this, but he gets pardoned by President U.S. Grant for this, which is kind of weird. That was, it's just a strange thing. And when he died in 1917, he was the last confirmed rebel general to die. He was the last one. You mentioned before those things. Now, they think they're going up against a local militia. And what's interesting is these Ricketts dudes, right? They're told literally, do not fire until you see CSA on their belt buckle. That's what they're told.
And that's what they do.
Right. And they do. They ultimately go 3 times. They hit the first time, get pushed back pretty quick. The second time, they try to go around to the right to a place called the Thomas Farm. And they're going to get driven back by the 87th Pennsylvania. These are 6th Corps guys. So they're starting to think, okay, something's up here. At this point, just west of the bridge, Wallace's guys are retreating. So this is simultaneously. So at this point, Wallace's guys are retreating as Ramsey's guys are coming. So that covered bridge, they're going to burn it. They're going to fire it up so people can't cross. Now, Early is going to hear what's going on McCausland's side. He's going to say, what the hell? They're freaking militia. What? Why can't you push through them, right? Because their very first attack, they put the whole damn group in. And they all came running back. He's going to order Breckinridge to his infantry, just go deal, whatever. I'm sick of dealing with these guys. I need to get to Washington. I don't want to get stuck bogged down in stupid Monocacy Junction. He's going to order Breckinridge to move forward. What's interesting is when they start to go, it's when McCausland's third attack is falling back. And what's an interesting story about this is a lot of John Brown Gordon's guys under Breckinridge who are going to make this assault are laughing at the Confederate cavalry. They're saying things like, oh, you run back to Richmond, we'll show you how real men fight. And that's just kind of funny how it was. So about 2:30 in the afternoon, John Gordon, you know him, another fun lover, Mary, he's going to attack with his 3 brigades. He's going to have a guy named Clement Evans, guys from Georgia, Zebulon and York from Louisiana, and he's going to have a guy named William Terry, who's going to have the old Stonewall Brigade under Colonel John Funk in some Virginia. So he's
and the Louisiana Tigers, remnants of them are here too.
He's going to have them too. So he's going to have a pretty good group of guys going in. Now Gordon's going to attack. He tells his guys, he yells at his troops, he says, I want you to fire until your gun barrels melt. That's the phrase he said to them. So they're all going to march towards Ricketts' line, who was behind that fence across the cornfield. There's his experienced guys going against experienced guys. Good teams on the field now. There's 2 A teams going at it. 2:30 in the afternoon, Gordon's men, they're moving across that field towards that Thomas Farm, okay? And you can almost hear the farm. It's a Thomas Farm going, oh, no, But they're going to be going against the guys from the 14th New Jersey, 151st New York, 106 New York, that 87 PA who pushed back McCausland. This is who they're going to be going against, that Thomas Farm. Some actually get across that cornfield, too. Some actually do, but they get pushed back initially. Evans and York's brigades are going to get hammered by the fence. They're going to get absolutely drilled up front. They're going to come running back in confusion. It's going to be a whole bunch of casualties on Gordon's guys. Now, Gordon pulls back and he's like, what in the freaking hell?
Yeah, well, the fighting was so chaotic there. He says, as we reached the first line of strong and high fencing and my men began to climb over it, they were hit by a tempest of bullets and many of the brave fellows fell at the first volley. And it's not like the fighting all over here is really, really chaotic, not just at the Thomas Farm, but over at Worthington Farm too, where there's a 6-year-old boy, Glenn Worthington, watching from the basement window. And he described it as being, it was load and fire, kill, kill, kill. And that's what's happening at the Worthington farm, but also the same thing is happening at the Thomas farm too.
You ever hear the story that happened to that kid after the battle?
Yeah, he was nearly blinded when he went to look for a bayonet,
Yeah, he
like in
went
the fire.
fire blow up in his face, and he had to wear a bandage.
But
Man,
he
kids,
wrote the first history of the battle.
or as my parents would say, "That's what you get," or "See what happens."
Yep,
That's what would happen
that
if
would
that
have
was
been
me.
mine too.
Oh yeah. So they're going across the cornfield now. Those guys are going to get pounded. Gordon's going to fall back and organize. Now it's about 3:30. So the day is getting long now. Gordon's like, okay. So he forms he's going to form the brigade of Terry, William Terry, from those Virginia guys, those Stonewall Brigade guys. And this time they're going to finally break through. They're going to break that Union line, but Gordon's going to lose a third of his division in this field, right? Including Clement Evans,
Oh, his
which is that
injury.
story. So this is a weird story. So he gets shot in the side. For whatever reason, he has a sewing kit in his pocket.
Well, they all
The
carried
bullet.
sewing kits with them.
Okay, but it just seems, I don't know what it is. It just seems
Well, I
weird
know
to me.
you can't sew. It doesn't mean other people can't.
Oh, it's stupid, you know. So he gets shot in the sewing kit, and the needles get pushed into his body. Now he lives. He doesn't get killed here, but
Yep.
he is going to pull needles out of him for 6 weeks after this.
Yep.
Now that you want to talk about a
And
crappy day.
some of that injury plagues him for the rest of his life. So you would have been the guy walking around the battlefield then with holes in your pants and shirts because you can't sew.
Better than getting needles coughing up the next 6 weeks. I'll take my chances. You know,
You would have
So-
been bartering for someone to sew your
I would have
clothes for you.
been. I would have pulled out the old credit card, buy a new pair of pants. I would have carried sewing kit. For God's sakes. Anyway, so it's 4:30 in the afternoon. The rebel numerical superiority is starting to win the day now. It's dictating the story. So I mentioned before, 16,000 Rebs
Yep.
against 6,000 Union guys. I don't care how strong you are. Those odds after a while aren't going to be in your favor.
Even
So
with my shitty math skills, I know that is not good odds.
carry the 3, divide the 2.
Yep.
Oh crap.
1, 2,
We're
3,
screwed.
4.
So Lew Wallace at this point is going to say it's 4:30. I've held these guys all day. I've done my job. So he's going to order a full retreat. He feels he's bought enough time because he's assuming Grant is sending guys back to Washington. So he figures he's bought enough time. After 9 hours of brutal fighting, he fought like a chess master. He really, really did.
He
Okay.
did. He knew they weren't going to win. The thing is Wallace went into this knowing full well they were not going to win this battle. And that's why he has, he already had a retreat plan in place going into this because he knew this is just about buying time to allow them to get troops to fortify DC. This is all I need to do. There's no way I can win this battle. And so because of that, he's already got a retreat plan in place.
He knows that his small troops have done the day, and they're going to get beaten up pretty good. They say that they drew back to Baltimore, but they say it was an orderly retreat. That's what they say. His moving his chess pieces around that battlefield with his 100-day guys and Ricketts 6 Corps guys, he moved his pieces brilliantly. A smaller army against a battle-tested Jubal early, and it's impressive what he did. It's interesting is this one of the stories that comes out of this battle is a story of Colonel William Seward, Mary. So you can go ahead and tell that story if you've done
Yes, I've done my homework on him.
I was gonna say, I don't know if you did. You didn't, but
So William Seward Jr., who is the son of the Secretary of State, he is there with the 9th. Am I getting it right? 9th Heavy Artillery.
yeah,
9th Heavy Artillery. So he and his men are going to be engaged in some pretty heavy fighting in this battle, and he's going to get shot down. His horse gets shot out from under him. He's going to basically be wounded on the battlefield. His leg is broken. I think he'd been shot through his arm as well. So he's wounded. So he eventually does make his way back to his troops. But they say he's not captured because before he was fighting in another battle and he got his uniform all just completely shot. And he hadn't replaced it at that point. So he was wearing kind of the
you know
uniform.
why? He was smart enough not to have a sewing kit on.
Yeah, he didn't know how to sew. That's why. So he had to borrow
no
someone
needles.
who lower rank. So they say that's why he doesn't get captured at this battle.
Better than choking on needles. I'll take saying.
But he eventually finds a mule and makes his way back to his men.
And it's a great story because
Yeah.
while this is going on, Seward, the old man back in Washington, is
Yep.
getting stories that your son has been injured and captured, right?
Yep.
So eventually Lew Wallace is going to telegraph him and say, hey, I got good news for you. Your kid is not injured. He's not captured. He rode a mule back,
Yeah.
which is kind of a hysterical story that he finds a mule. He takes a silk handkerchief as a bridle. right?
Yep.
And he's going to ride off the field and he stays ahead of the Confederates on this. It's just it's just a fun story.
It's a really cool story. Another cool part of the story too is that years later there was a tree that had been on the battlefield, and the tree ended up being cut down. Well, the men of the Ninth Heavy Artillery, they end up taking part of that tree and they make like a kind of a walking stick for Seward. And it's actually at the Seward House in Albany, New York. It's not on display, but they do have it as part of their collection. But that is a tree from the Battle of Monocacy battlefield that he was given by his men. It's a pretty cool story. But yeah, the funny thing is like Seward's getting reports that his son's been captured and he's injured, and then Wallace is like, no, he's good, and then Wallace has to go back and say, actually, he is injured.
Yeah, but it wasn't that bad though.
No, it's okay. a broken leg's pretty fucking bad. I guess compared to other injuries.
Sucking on a friggin' needle, coughing that up. I think you are absolutely minimizing the effect of coughing up needles. I don't know what the hell is wrong.
But they all carried sewing kits with them.
Okay, well, guess who didn't? Seward. You know what? Probably saved his life. So, speaking of, these guys early, we mentioned before he got beaten up pretty good. He's going to lose 900 guys, but more important is he lost time, and he ain't got it. He's lost so much time. It's one of those battles. It's a tactical victory because he forced Wallace off the field, but they were beaten up now. They need time, so they have to rest now. Early's pissed. He's like, "You got to be shitting me." Because we got stuck fighting these guys, and now I lost a day. So now July 10th, the day after the battle, they've got to rest. They're messed up. They're banged up. So they finally get going, and they get by 10 p.m. on the 10th. They get to Rockville, Maryland, which is about 20 miles from Washington, D.C. And now on the next day, on 7/11, okay, so everything, roads are wide open 24/7 on 7/11, Early's advanced cavalry is going to reach the outskirts of Washington. Post-Monocacy in the city of Washington is a freaking panic at this point. Mm-hmm. So all they're hearing is, we got our asses beat at Monocacy, Early's coming. So the citizens are in a full panic. There are rumors of 50,000 Rebs are coming. They're advancing on the city. Wallace bought time, but Early's still coming. Tell the whole story.
Montgomery Meigs was in such a panic. He's commanding like kind of civilians in the War Department at this point. Like he's their boss. So these are government employees. And he ends up telling them, okay, we're shutting things down. And everybody's probably like, yay, we get to go home. And Meigs is like, no, here, take a rifle. Get up to the forts. He's arming citizens.
At the White House, okay, Stanton is discussing with Lincoln the concept of evacuating and going to New York City. So he's like, we should probably think about this. And Lincoln goes, are you kidding me? If I leave the city, it's for the election, it's political suicide. Yep. I'm not going to win. I can't leave the city. But he says, here's the deal. If the Rebs get through, you're going to take Mary and you're going to take Tad. You're going to put them on a steamer and get them to New York City. You're going to give them the help and the cabinet. Except you, Stanton, you're stuck with me. You're staying with me in Washington. The rest are all going to go. He's stunned because he's gone from, in about a 30-day period, he's hearing stories of Grant on the outskirts of Richmond. Now he's got Lee on the outskirts of Washington. He's like, what the hell happens? Yeah. Right? He sees Monocacy, Lincoln is, as a complete disaster. They don't know the story, but they just know the Rebs are coming. The fate of the country is in our hands. We've got no army to stop these guys. I am screwed. And this is good. This is it. So he needs to defend the capital all costs. Now, you mentioned before Montgomery Meigs. They're going to take all the government employees. Yep. We're talking about the clerks, no training. Here's a rifle. Go figure it out. The injured soldiers who can still walk in Washington, they're going to be sent to the front lines. They're all going. Any man in Washington who can fight is going to fight if they can. Yeah, they're going out there saying, we come defend the city. A lot of guys came out. Now, I mentioned before, even though there was complete panic, there was also a real enthusiasm of patriotism that very reminiscent of 9/11 here. Yep. Where everybody was in a panic, but suddenly everybody was extremely patriotic and suddenly would run through a wall for the country. That's what Washington was turning into. You had guys with zero experience grabbing the musket. They had freed blacks to dig entrenchments. They all got on-the-spot training. Here you go, and they can't even load their rifle, let alone shoot it, but they're like, we're going to have to figure this thing out. Now, the Rebs, post-Monocacy, like I said, that battle took a lot out of them. And this is, again, credit towards Lew Wallace and to Ricketts. So they're beat up. They needed that rest we talked about. But that day of rest, they're going to rue that day. Have you ever rued something? Have you rued the day ever?
Probably.
Well, this is the day Jubal Early is going to rue, because this is going to be his missed chance, is this day that they stop. So
Yeah.
Lincoln, he jumps on his iPhone. He texts old U.S. Grant down there, and he says, he goes, I need troops. You got to send troops here immediately. Grant gets this message, and he is pissed. He's like, you have got to be shitting me. He hears about Monocacy, and he goes, who the hell is lost Monocacy? And they goes, General Wallace. And he goes, that guy from Shiloh? Of course.
Yeah.
And he's just rolling his eyes. So he goes to me and says, hey, who can I send? Give me someone I can frigging trust. He goes, 6th Corps. Send 6th Corps.
Yeah.
He's going to send the first 2 divisions under Horatio Wright up there. So he's still blaming Wallace from Shiloh. He's got a little memories,
Well, he actually, right after, the other thing he does too is he goes and puts Major General Ord in charge of Wallace's troops right after Monocacy.
Yeah.
And Wallace does not find that out until the 11th. He's still in charge of the middle department, but he's not in command of these troops anymore, which is probably like a fuck you to Grant, But once officials become aware of what Wallace has done at Monocacy, he gets full command back. But that doesn't happen until July 28th.
So what he'll do is he's going to send Horatio Wright, who's in charge of the 6th Corps. Now, he's already had the 3rd Division go up. That's Ricketts. Now, he's going to send the first 2, which is going to be under a guy named David Russell and George Getty. They're going to be going to Washington, D.C., and they're going to be get there as fast as they can. The Beltway traffic was brutal, but they did finally get there. I think some things never changed. This is going to be a 10,000-man infusion of experienced dudes shot in the right arm of Washington. So you're going to have 3 brigades on each that are going to show up. Those guys in Montgomery Meigs you mentioned before, they call them the emergency division, they call them, which is kind of like the accountants and the temp from the washroom. He has a gun. I knew I should have called in sick today. Early is pissed off at losing that day. Bitter, he's got a temper, so you can tell how pissed off he is because he knows he lost the initiative. Breckinridge said, listen, we had to rest. We just had to. We can't just, just not freaking robots. But Early is still at this point, it's like, well, all right, well, it's okay because the city is still defended by locals, militia. I think we're fine. So we'll be okay. So 1 p.m., Early is so close to the city, he can see it. He can probably hear the crowd from the Nationals game cheering. He's so close.
He looks through his binoculars. He can see the Capitol Dome.
He can see it, but he doesn't want to commit to an attack just yet, regardless. But John Gordon is kind of like, let's get him.
Yep.
And he's like, you know what? Let's do it quick. Early's like, listen, let's just chill for a second. We don't know who the hell these people are here. Let's just take it easy. He screws up again because Early gives his guys more time to rest again. He's like, all right, it's the 11th. Let's just chill for the night and hit him on the 12th.
Good.
This is when that story with Montgomery Blair's house take place, right?
Yep.
Which is great. I'll let you tell. It's a good drinking story.
So what happens is the men go to the home of Montgomery Blair and they raid his whiskey stores and they get completely shit-faced. Like probably worse than what happens in Goderich on a Saturday night.
Well, no, it's that bad. But this is not a
Call
couple
me maybe.
of bottles.
They all get to call me maybe situation.
Right. But we're talking about a basement full of barrels upon barrels of whiskey. We're not talking about a bottle of Jack Daniels behind the couch.
Yeah.
We're talking a whole bunch. They hit it hard, and one of the reasons why Early doesn't want to fight on the 11th, they're tired, it's hot, but a lot of his guys are drunk as hell. And he's like, God's sakes. He's like, all right, we'll wait till the next day. So
there's nothing worse than being hungover when it's humid out either, like that.
Especially when you get shot at. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not good. But yeah, the other thing to mention too is that, this area has been seeing temperatures of over 90 degrees for a few weeks during these battles, during Monocacy and the Battle of Fort Stevens as well.
The morning of the 12th, Early is going to finally advance. This is the Battle of Fort Stevens. Okay, he's going to attack Fort Stevens, which is just north of the city. He looks and he's surprised because he sees 6th Corps troops defending Fort Stevens. He's like, friggin' 6th Corps again? Mm-hmm. How many of these people are? So
Frank Wheaton's probably up there waving to him.
He probably was, Team Wheaton. But he was still expecting, for whatever reason, that those guys were still going to be in Petersburg. Now, you had to think that everyone knew he was fighting in Maryland going towards D.C. They would have said that, but he still wasn't sure. I mentioned before how Lincoln didn't want to vacate the city. He wants to visit the front. He thinks it would be good to be seen as the president at the front. He's going to take Mary and Edwin Stanton, and they're going to go to Fort Stevens. Now, Lincoln at this point, he sees the troops, he sees the embankments. He's like, all right, you know what? I'm starting to feel okay now. I've been nervous. This might be okay. I'm feeling a lot better than I did. He's going to climb to the parapet to see what the hell's going on. At this point, they're going to be rebel sharpshooters firing at anything.
Yep.
Now, they don't know who the hell they're shooting at, but they see movement, they shoot. So someone is going to take a shot at old Abe Lincoln, right? And the person who shot him probably never knew that the guy they were shooting at was Lincoln, which is kind of funny. And there's that report that a young Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., future Supreme Court Justice, yelled to Lincoln, "Get down, you damn fool," to old Abe. And he did, you know what? He got down.
Yep. But apparently it was also Horatio Wright that did it too.
Yeah.
And about 18 other people.
Well, there were rumors that, that Horatio Wright was shot. And there's all these stories that came out of this. Bottom line is he ducked. He got down. And it's the only time in American history that a president was fired upon by an enemy in wartime.
Yeah, and Horatio Wright actually regretted bringing Lincoln up there because he eventually realized, like, shit, I can't guarantee this guy's safety.
Yeah, if you take the guy up there to take us for sightseeing and you get your president shot, that'd be a tough one to walk off. So Early is going to continue he's going to see that what's going on. They're hot. They've been fighting. He knows at this point the dream of D.C. is over.
Yep.
Washington City ain't going to be ransacked, but, I'm not going to be sitting at the old Ebbett Grill in front of that Grant picture drinking my old fashioned tonight. It ain't going to be happening. So he knows. So by the end of July 12th, and we're going to do a whole story on Fort Stevens, okay?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot that gets into this, but we just want to get too deep in the weeds. By the end of the 12th, Early knows that it's over with because the feds are reinforced, not just by the 6th Corps, but also by the 19th Corps. So you had a lot of guys there now.
Yep, those are the guys from the Gulf, right?
Exactly. I think Gulf of Mexico, you said Gulf for some reason. So by 5 p.m., okay, one of the brigade commanders, a guy named Daniel Bidwell, is going to attack. They're going to go out of the parapet and they're going to attack them. And they're going to push Early off the field, but they're going to lose 200 or 300 guys in the meantime. They're going to do it. So at that point, the writing's on the wall. Early knows it's over with. So he is going to leave. He's going to cross the Potomac back into Virginia on July 13th, 1864, which is exactly 1 year to the day that Lee did after Gettysburg, which is always funny how coincidences always tend to work out. And he had that quote where he says, "We didn't take Washington. We scared Abe Lincoln like hell."
Yep.
And you can just picture him doing that. So the defense of Washington, that Atlanta Sherman attack really was kind of the one that really sealed election for Lincoln. It really, really was. I mean, really, Atlanta probably did.
Atlanta's about 2 months away, just less than 2 months away at this point from getting it. But yeah, if you think that Early had managed to get into the capital, what that would have done, he wouldn't have stayed, but what that would have done for, morale and just that kind of threat. If he had managed to get up there and put that flag over the city, even just for a little while, like that would have done a lot.
It would have been for election purposes. I mean, every campaign commercial on TV from McClellan would have been the Confederate flag.
Exactly. Okay. And that's all Lee and Davis want to do is they just want to, they know they wouldn't be able to actually take the Capitol, but they just want to get in there and fuck with it just enough to get the election. But when they don't do that, I think that's when the pressure really starts to shift over to Sherman in the Western Theater and Atlanta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For the most part, the Confederacy was dead. I mean, they were bleeding anyway, but they were dead. After Atlanta they were dead. But this attack on Washington, Early's attack, was a real mortal wound that many mortal wounds they took. Now, Halleck, to his credit, Mary, he never changes. He blames Wallace for Monocacy. We mentioned before, he hates Wallace because he's a West Point guy. He just didn't like him. Now, Lincoln also sent a Vinegar Valentine to U.S. Grant about Wallace, down in Petersburg, explaining that. Now, this is where it's funny. The media picks up the ball to really help to explain the story of what Wallace actually did.
Yeah.
The New York Tribune, Horace Greeley, with the hair there, he writes that Wallace held out for 4 hours longer than honor required. So there was a national push, redemption for Lew Wallace for what he did, because the story came out and said, what this guy did actually was pretty substantial, because we didn't get our guys there until they really right when Early was getting there. So what would have happened if they didn't have, really ended up being 2.5 days he saved. The battle, the day he rested, the next day, and then a half a day on the 11th, right? September 1864. That September, Wallace and Grant will actually meet to talk about this. They'll sit down, they'll talk about it. Now, there's no real talk about what they talked about, but Wallace did say in his letter, or whoever he wrote a letter to, that he said, a defeat did more for me than the victories I've been engaged in. So my guess is Grant said, all right, you did good.
Grant does say that in his memoirs. He says, if Early had been won but one day earlier, he might have entered the capital before the arrival of reinforcements I had sent. General Wallace contributed on this occasion by the defeat of the troops under him a greatest benefit to the cause than often falls to the lot of a commander of an equal force to render by means of a victory. So, in other words, Grant is saying Wallace lost the battle, but he saved, he
Yeah.
bought us the time. Like, he's giving him the credit. And I think it's like, immediately after the battle, like, Grant's like, okay, Ord, you're in charge of his men. And Wallace is just kind of like in charge of the middle department. But then Wallace gets reinstated on July 28th once stuff starts coming out of what he's done at Monocacy. And the other thing Wallace says too is that these men died to save the national capital, and they did save it.
Did. They certainly did. That's a monument you can go visit at still Monocacy today. So what's interesting is time goes on and people still don't study what Wallace did. They really don't.
No.
Now, 35 years after the battle, Wallace, he's going to write Ben-Hur in 1882, I think, right around
Which
there.
is a bit of that's
right,
his big fuck you to Grant.
Right. He writes that letter to Grant. He's famous for this at this time. Now he's a famous guy. He's going to have dinner with John Gordon, who he fought, obviously, at this battle, Monocacy, who was a senator from the state of Georgia at this point. And Gordon said he wanted to make the acquaintance of the only man who whipped me during the war. It was funny because Wallace allegedly had reminded him, hey, you kind of kicked my ass, right? And then Gordon said, Monocacy snatched Washington out of our hands. Because that was the defeat he was talking about. What this battle does, it ultimately, mentioned before, it's an underrated and understudied battle because it's in the middle of Petersburg, it's in the middle of Atlanta, and it's a Union loss. Yep. Sometimes there are things that happen that you lose the battle, but you win the war. And this is certainly one of them. And that's why this battle to this day is still going to be called the Battle that Saved Washington.
And it's very significant. And I was just thinking that, some of these battles that, really, really get studied, like Gettysburg, Antietam, Chickamauga, and all them, I wonder to go back and ask the generals that fought in them, what was the most significant battle you fought in? What changed the course of the war? That we might hear some different answers. We might hear, and I just thought of that now at the top of my head with, if you ask John Gordon, he would probably say Monocacy, because we lost the capital. And because of that, it was done. Maybe in his eyes, that was the end of the war. To go back and ask some of these guys, what were the significant battles? I'm sure a lot of them would say things like Ball's Bluff, Stones River, and we might not hear things like Gettysburg as much from them. We might hear about some of these smaller battles. I just thought of that now.
Well, it's interesting because these guys went into this campaign with the weight of the world on their shoulders, thinking their fate of the country rested upon them.
Yep.
So there's probably some truth to that. I think if John Gordon, if you were to ask him, if you take your Ouija board down to Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta, you may get an answer, but he probably would have said that. Early, he would go on to continue the Valley campaign throughout 1864. Eventually, he'll end up fighting Phil Sheridan. Sheridan will beat his ass senseless. And then eventually Lee is going to fire Early. And what's interesting is Early would say years after the war that, one of his greatest achievements was being fired by Lee. Mm-hmm. He says that he had framed his letter of termination. He would show everyone who came over.
Yep.
Because it was a letter from Robert E. Lee. But again, what Monocacy did is it was kind of that thing that happens that play that happens in a football game no one remembers because of the results. But then you watch the replay and you go, oh, I forgot about that play. If that didn't happen, everything could have changed.
Yep.
And that's what this was. To your point, if they got into D.C. or Washington, they would have ransacked. They would have burned it. They would have done everything they did, like to Hagerstown or Chambersburg, all the stuff, all that towns, Frederick, they would have demanded money. But it would have been a psychological nightmare, especially if Lincoln fled the town before the election.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about a what if? Holy shit.
Yeah. This is up there with like something like Stones River, Ball's Bluff as well, just for the ramifications that it has. And like I said, I think if you could go back and ask some of these generals, they might say something like that over something like, oh yeah, well, I was at Gettysburg and it was a big battle. But in terms of the outcome and how it affected us, something like Monocacy might be higher on their list.
Mm-hmm. It's certainly one worth talking about. Hopefully people will study it going forward. I hope people enjoy the listen to this episode because I think it's a lot of fun to study. It's one of my favorite ones. If you ever visit Monocacy, which if you're at Gettysburg, it's about 40 minutes away. It's an easy ride right through Frederick. It's kind of a weird battlefield because like that highway goes right through it. It's got a really cool visitor center and some places you can visit. It's kind of split up in two halves. You get the best farm on one side of it And then you got the Monocacy River, and then you've got the Worthington and Thomas Farm on the other. But it's a really great place to go. It's a beautiful vista, and definitely one that you should definitely check out because, like I said before, Barry, all battlefields matter, don't they?
They absolutely do. And one of the reasons we know about Monocacy and the reason it is a battlefield now is because of Glenn Worthington, who witnessed the Battle of the Age of Six. And then in the 1920s, he finally wrote down an account of it, and it was the first history that anybody had ever written about that battle.
And that's interesting battlefield because it wasn't made an official battlefield until the 1970s.
Exactly. Yeah, they
You know,
recognized it in the 1930s, but then
right?
the preservation doesn't begin until the 1970s.
And so if you look at it, if you go on Google Earth and look at it, there's a big industrial development on the north side
Yeah.
where Ramses guys would have come down. There's trees to block it. But it's certainly one that's totally worth visiting. So I think we can probably leave it there
Yep.
and send the boys off. And hopefully we did Lew Wallace and the rest of the boys some justice on this one.
I
So
think
what's
we
next,
did.
Mary?
So next week we are talking First Battle of Bull Run, but before that, we are having our roundtable next Wednesday, so July the 21st. So if you've never attended our roundtable, it's just kind of we get together via Zoom, 6 o'clock till about 7:30, Wednesday, July 21st. Eastern time. I will mention that because I know we have some people that join us from Lake California. And it's just basically like you're sitting in a bar or a coffee shop and you're talking about the Civil War. We don't really have a topic. So if you've never attended before and you would like an invite, info@civilwarbreakfastclub.com, and we will make sure that you get an invite to our roundtable. And we would love to have you join us if you've never joined us before, because it's a really group of people that come on there to talk Civil War with us. Like I said, first Bull Run. And then after that, episode to be determined. But we will determine what that one is soon.
Hey, just let me know. You might want to let me know.
I will let you know.
Okay. All right. Well, off we go once again. So again, great episode. Always fun to talk about the I don't want to say lesser battles, but certainly the lesser study battles, because I think this is one that I don't think anybody who fought in this would ever say was a lesser battle, but it was certainly one that had huge ramifications despite its 9-hour battle, relatively small numbers, in the fact that it was a Union loss that ultimately led to a bigger picture victory in the end. So off we go. So any final words from you, Fincheru?
Well, thank you for everyone for listening. And thank you to you for being the awesome co-host you are and dealing with my Tuesday moods.
Well, I get those DQ gift certificates, so I'm going to keep talking.
Okay, well, that's good.
Ooh,
I know how to keep
all
you
right.
involved in this then.
I'm an easy person to satisfy, so there we go. Wow, okay. All right. So, hey, it was a good time as well. So we will look forward to talking to you soon. Look forward to hearing people on the live on Saturday, and then the round table coming up down the road. So off we go. So again, Mary, I say many times, the pleasure as always yours. And we will look forward to talking to you as we go off into our next episode as we head towards Manassas and Bull Run.
See you guys later.
Peace out.
Bye.